Welcome to the WTR Biotech Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-Founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. In today's podcast episode, I'm being joined by Dr. Chris Witowski, CEO and Co-Founder of Psilera, an early-stage biotech company focused on developing next-generation neuroplastogens for neurological disorders. Also joining us is my Water Tower Equity Research colleague, Robert Sassoon. Good morning, Chris and Robert, and thank you for joining today's podcast.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to it.
Great to be here too.
Chris, today's topic of discussion is focused on biomarkers for neurological diseases. But before I turn things over to Robert for several questions, let me kick the podcast off by asking you to tell our listeners about your professional background and to provide a high-level overview of the company you co-founded.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So as you mentioned, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Psilera. By background, I'm a PhD trained chemist, primarily initially focused in natural product drug discovery. That's where I did my PhD research. And it just so happens we kind of find ourselves in the golden era of natural products yet again. It only took about 100 years from the discovery of penicillin. But after my PhD studies, I joined an early stage startup called AltMed. Ultimately became their chief scientific officer, helped them raise $35 million, and was focused on drug delivery technologies of known CNS drugs. So developed a patent portfolio there, helped license it, and ultimately that company merged and went public for $1.5 billion. And what myself and my co-founder Jackie, who we did our PhD studies together, we saw an opportunity around 2019 after the approval of Spravato, or intranasal esketamine, as sort of a renaissance in this new era of natural products focused on psychedelics. And really, when we started the company, we had two key pillars of R&D. And this is number one, focused on drug delivery technologies of existing psychedelics. We successfully actually built out this pipeline and actually licensed it to another company called Atai Life Sciences recently. And at the same time, we're also focused on drug discovery. How do we make psychedelics better drugs? And really we found ways to modify the molecules, create new chemical entities while removing some of the side effect liabilities like hallucinogenic effects, cardiovascular risks. So ultimately, this class of drugs called neuroplastogens, we feel has the potential to be best in class. And what we're doing specifically in neurodegeneration in areas like FTD, we're looking at a first in class there as well. So yeah, I think that's about it for myself. So I'll pause there.
Excellent. I appreciate that. Quite a relevant background for what you're doing today. So I'll turn it over to Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Hi, Chris. It's great to have you on the podcast. If you go back more than 25 years, the term biomarkers was barely in the medical vocabulary. So perhaps you could start off by explaining why biomarkers have become so important to the drug discovery process.
Yeah, I mean it's really, like you said, coming leaps and bounds recently. Oncology has always benefited from this biomarker approach. Obviously, you can biopsy a tumor, have a genetic marker or other chemical markers, and this is generally, liquid biomarkers that can be used to aid drug discovery, stratify patients. So patients that have a specific anomaly genetically, you can include those patients and get a better response. And this all goes into kind of what a lot of people are really airing as the golden era of precision medicine. So how can you treat specific patients with specific ailments? So really, like I said, in oncology, it's been done for decades very successfully. And now I would say a new era is dawning in neuroscience. And of course, the brain's a little bit different. You can't biopsy the brain, but yeah, look forward to discussing sort of the new emerging trends and landmarks that have happened recently in neuro with biomarkers.
Right, great. So there are different types of biomarkers, as you mentioned. Can you tell us what are the most important types in the CNS field?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, liquid biomarkers. So these are typically taken from blood or cerebral spinal fluid, and you're looking for specific, proteins or other markers that stand out clinically. So a good example of these are the amyloid beta proteins that have been long studied in Alzheimer's disease. phosphorylated tau or p-tau. That's another one for Alzheimer's disease with a big milestone. So these liquid biomarkers certainly are kind of the gold standard. They're less invasive. They're very cheap diagnostically. But there are other biomarkers, sometimes referred to as pharmacodynamic biomarkers. So this can be things like imaging, PET imaging, MRI imaging to look at specific brain regions of atrophy, for instance, or even using EEG to look at brain waves, another pharmacodynamic marker that's really, I would say, coming along pretty well in neuroscience and psychiatry specifically.
Right. You mentioned blood biomarkers. The FDA approved its first blood-based biomarker for Alzheimer's last month. So how significant is that event and why?
Yeah, I think this is really a big deal. So what this diagnostic tool allows physicians and patients to do is quickly analyze a patient to see if they have a higher risk for Alzheimer's disease or even have Alzheimer's disease. So the specific blood tests you're looking for p-tau 217, so phosphorylated tau, as well as an amyloid beta protein that's been well studied. And it can diagnose the potential for Alzheimer's 20 years before the disease even manifests, so pre-symptomatically. So this is huge. And I think what you're going to start to see is really a similar hypothesis that's happened with oncology. So early detection and treatment is everything. There's only so much you can do in a late stage Alzheimer's case. It's really palliative. You can't really kind of regenerate a brain, unfortunately. So I think having these early detection is really, really going to help patients, identify whether they have it. Removing environmental factors, changing lifestyle factors, even treatments, that can help alleviate some of this even the current beta amyloid drugs on the market, if you're dosing these earlier, you could potentially have a better outcome with this. So I think it is a big deal.
Right, thanks. What other biomarker advances do you see in the pipeline that you think can accelerate the journey to a curative and better still preventative solutions to currently hard to treat neurological conditions, be them neurodegenerative or even neuropsychiatric conditions?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We talked about p-tau and amyloid beta. I think with the new diagnostic tool, what this allows Alzheimer's disease to do is diagnose patients earlier in the journey, even before symptomatic, before they even see a doctor. And I think this is huge because early detection is everything. And also, a little more time is needed, but I think what people are expecting is basically, this ratio is going to increase as the disease increases. So, can this tool be used as a surrogate biomarker? So if you're able to regulate this ratio, are you now, helping the patient actually be curative? And I think this is a huge aspect to the disease. Other areas in neurodegeneration are coming along, such as neurofilament light chain. So similar to p-tau or amyloid beta, this is another protein that's associated in the brain, can be sampled through either cerebral spinal fluid or blood, which is much less invasive. And it's being used in areas such as ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease and frontotemporal dementia, which we're really looking at Psilera. And you can use the ratio of neurofilament light chain to p-tau 217 to actually exclude patients who don't have ALS or FTD, and who have the disease. And I think this is, again, a really crucial development. And they're even looking at neurofilament light chain as a surrogate biomarker currently in ALS. Elsewhere in neurodegeneration, alpha-synuclein for Parkinson's disease, that's being looked at quite heavily. But lastly, I think the area that a lot of people are now trying to bridge this biomarker strategy and precision medicine strategy is in psychiatry. And I would say this is sort of the next era because the diagnostic tools for psychiatric diseases are really outdated. They're questionnaires. If you have depression, you could also have a number of other psychiatric conditions. So I think these biomarker tools, and we can talk a little bit about, what advancements are going on, but I think this is sort of the next frontier that a lot of people are looking at.
Yeah. I think actually the statistics are so interesting. Because basically on the dementia front, there are probably 50, 55 million that have actually been diagnosed dementia. But I saw another even more interesting statistic that over 300 million um, people around the world, I don't know how they got to that number, but they've estimated have the proclivity to actually get some form of dementia. So obviously, any preventative move to a preventative diagnosis would be remarkable and revolutionary. So take on of that. Maybe you talk a little bit more about what sort of specific advances you are seeing, or you think will come through, and how long do you think it'll quickly will take when we can actually see tangible evidence of serious improvement in slowing and even stopping and even reversing these sort of conditions.
Yeah, again, I'll say that this diagnostic tool for Alzheimer's disease is a big breakthrough. Now, what you're going to need is time. I would say at least a few years. Obviously, the longer the better. You can pressure test some of these theories, but effectively, if you can normalize this ratio in Alzheimer's disease, you're effectively curing the patient and reducing the pathology in the brain. You should have fewer cognitive issues, fewer psychiatric issues, which are accompanied with the disease. Um, it's going to take time. It's hard to really put a specific number to it. But other areas, and there are late stage trials looking at neurofilament light chain as a surrogate marker too. I think there should be readouts in the next couple of years, which will be really interesting and put new light on this new biomarker specifically for ALS, but also FTD, and it's also relevant in dementia and Alzheimer's disease as well. And I would say I mentioned it a little earlier for psychiatry. The issue is you don't really have these well-defined genetic markers or biomarkers in psychiatry. But a lot of people are looking at pharmacodynamic markers such as EEG. So looking at brain waves, and I would say one of the emerging tools is psychedelic drugs. What clinical data has shown is single doses or just a few doses can really improve patients' outcomes, remission of the disease for months and months, much greater than currently available therapies, which is great. But really, the way these drugs work is they stimulate glutamate in the brain, and this increases gamma waves, which can be picked up using EEG. So now, especially the area that Psilera is looking in these neuroplastogens, these drugs without the drug effects of psychedelics, effectively what you can do is develop a drug that stimulates glutamate. You don't have the psychedelic effects associated with it, but you're showing those same signatures in EEG, the increase in gamma waves, which do lead to a durable drug response. So I think, again, tools like this, which data readouts are coming, I would say in the next year or two, really will help kind of shape the treatment paradigm for patients and ultimately lead to new treatments coming for
Yeah.
patients.
Are you actually close to going into clinical trials?
Yeah, so we're looking at a phase one trial next year. Again, we're looking at frontotemporal dementia, so looking to bring in patients earlier into that journey. It's a rare disease, so that will allow us to bring in those patients a little bit sooner. And with FTD, it's an early onset dementia. You typically have a pretty significant psychiatric burden. So about 90% of all dementia patients have a psychiatric condition, whether it be apathy or depression, anxiety. So we're looking at some of these symptoms first because we can prove this out in under 12 weeks in a clinical trial, which is important. But ultimately, we think the way the drug works can have lasting benefits on the disease. I won't make any claims, but certainly, we think there's a lot of potential in this drug mechanism to help the symptoms. But longer term, we think there's a quality of life and hopefully durability of life benefit.
Right. We'll look forward to getting some updates on that. Well, thanks, Chris. That's for your insights on that. That's very helpful. And I'll just pass it back to Tim.
Thanks, Robert. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Chris Witowski, CEO and co-founder of Psilera, as well as a special thanks to the Water Tower research producer and editor of the podcast, Joe Brunetto. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, and conference schedules. We will see you next time for another edition of the WTR Biotech Spotlight.